Hi, I'm Tori, and today I'm going to be discussing the book Luster by Raven Leilani. I listened to the audiobook narrated by Ariel Blake. This is a story about a woman in her mid-20s who begins a relationship with a man who's in an open marriage, and just kind of what she learns about herself through this experience. And the main character spends a lot of the book thinking about how she relates to people and how life is different for her than it is for this man that she's become involved with. And it's just a very thought-provoking, very interesting book. If you have any interest in reading it, I recommend that you go do that and you can come back and hear my opinions. So I thought it was very interesting to see how the story progressed. At the beginning, it was almost entirely focused on the main character's relationship with Eric. She worked so hard every moment that she was interacting with Eric to make him think that she was relaxed and casual, and there was just so much effort that she put into getting this relationship going. And then once she had kind of secured her relationship with him, he almost vanished from the book. And the story became much more focused on her relationship with Rebecca. And I was fascinated to see how much more of an emotional connection she had with Rebecca and Aquila than she did with Eric. They really mattered to her and were really a part of her life, and they had such genuine connections. And their relationships were strange and unconventional, and they could be strained at times, but they still really wanted to know each other and really wanted to understand each other. And it was so interesting to contrast this deeply emotional bond with the purely physical relationship she had with Eric. And the dynamics between the three of them were very interesting, because Eric and Rebecca did have an open marriage, but it was clear that Rebecca was not enthusiastic about it. And we don't get to see how this arrangement was met. We don't know how willing of a participant Rebecca was. And when Eric and the main characters start dating, it feels like it's ethically all right, because they do have an open marriage. Eric does have his wife's consent, but she has also set guidelines, and they ignore these guidelines fairly quickly. And then at one point, Rebecca does ask the main character if she'll stop sleeping with her husband, and the main character doesn't agree to, but it still kind of feels like maybe she shouldn't. And as the book goes on, it starts to feel less like a reasonable relationship within an open marriage and more like an illicit affair. The most interesting part of the story to me was seeing how life was different for the main character and for Eric. He is a well-off, middle-aged white man who has been married to his wife for a long time and is in the middle of a very kind of contentious relationship with his wife, and that's what's led to him having an open marriage. While the main character is a young black woman who's still just kind of figuring out her life and is living in the city with roommates, struggling to just pay her bills and get her life started. And there were so many ways that the world was different for them. Just these little everyday injustices that the main character had to live with as part of her everyday life that Eric couldn't even begin to comprehend. Most of the story happened in spaces that were primarily white, and occasionally the main character would meet another black person in them. And there was always this sense of camaraderie, of the two of them having something in common and of having to survive in the same situation, whether they did that similarly or in completely different ways. And it really made me think about how much easier my life is because I don't have to think about that, and because society doesn't put that pressure on me or judge me as being different. I also thought her job was interesting. I've read lots of books about people who have just kind of gotten out of college and they have a job that they don't really like all that much, so they don't try very hard. And that was something I was very familiar with. She didn't try all that hard, so she got fired. And then in the stories that I'm used to reading, this would have been the point where she goes back to her apartment and she sits on the couch and cries for a month and re-examines her life, and eventually she gets back out there and decides to go in a different direction with her career. But that is a huge luxury that she was not able to afford. And from the moment she lost her job, she was searching for new jobs. And she managed to find something to get her money. And she was doing this horrible food delivery job that she completely depended on. And she didn't have the option to laze around and feel sorry for herself. She had to go out that day and start working as hard as she could at this exhausting job that didn't even cover the basic expenses of living. And it showed just how much more exhausting it is to lead a life that's less financially stable and less secure. And then there was the police assault at the end of the book, when the main character and Aquila are just coming back to the house, and they both live there, they have every right to be there. The police are in the neighborhood investigating a minor crime that has happened, and they immediately focus their attention on these two black women who have arrived at their own house, And because Akilah is young and hasn't been in this situation before, she does not treat the police with very much respect. She lives in a middle-class, white, suburban neighborhood, and for most people living in that neighborhood, speaking to the police like she does would be considered rude and not appropriate, but not something that could potentially put your life in danger. And as these two women are pinned to the ground, they don't know if they're going to survive, and they have to deal with the fact that this could be the day that they die. And what was even more upsetting than that was the moment right afterwards where the main character has to sit Akilah down and explain to her that life isn't fair and that every interaction with the police has the potential to turn into a life or death situation, and there isn't really anything she can do about that. And that moment in the book made me think about my own childhood and how when I was a little girl, my parents made sure that I always knew that if I was hurt or in trouble or scared and there was a police officer nearby, I should go to them because they were there to help me, and they absolutely would help me and keep me safe. And I hadn't really thought before about what a privilege that is, and how lucky I am to have been born with a face that means that where I live, if I'm ever in a dangerous situation, I will almost certainly be safer if I see a police officer coming toward me than if I don't. And it's just so heartbreaking and so unfair that that is not true for everybody, and that some people do have to teach their children to be afraid of the police and to treat them as someone who could end their lives at any moment. This book was so eye-opening. It made me think about how many privileges there are in my life that I take for granted, that aren't extended to everybody in our society. This book really made me think about how narrow my perspective is. And I really want to make a point to try to read more books that tell the stories of people who experience the world differently than I do.